Elijah Carter walked into class smiling, until his professor held up his exam and said, "There's no way you wrote this." The room went silent. His answers were perfect, yet he was branded a cheater, not because of his work but because of who he was, and what happened next would expose a secret this university never wanted revealed. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The heavy oak doors of Hamilton Hall creaked open as Elijah Carter stepped inside, the hum of 100 voices bouncing off the stone walls. The lecture hall loomed before him, tiered seats stacked like steps of judgment, a towering chalkboard that stretched nearly from floor to ceiling, and a faint smell of old paper that clung to the room like a ghost. He clutched his notebook tighter against his chest, moving quietly toward the middle row, trying not to draw attention, but he felt it anyway. Eyes. Always eyes. Dr. Charles Whitmore, tall and silver-haired with a sharp suit that seemed more fitted for a courtroom than a classroom, already stood at the front. He scanned the hall with military precision, his pale blue eyes cutting across the students like a searchlight. When those eyes landed on Elijah, they lingered for a second too long. His jaw tightened ever so slightly before he turned back to the chalkboard. Elijah lowered himself into his seat, exhaling slowly. He had felt that stare since the very first day of class. Subtle, sharp, but unmistakable. It was not the look professors gave eager students who asked good questions, or even the polite glance at a stranger. It was something colder, heavier, as if Whitmore had already decided who Elijah was, and what he was worth. But Elijah told himself it didn't matter. What mattered was the math. From the age of 10, numbers had been his escape. While other kids on his block in Baltimore played basketball, or traded sneakers, Elijah sat on the cracked stoop of his grandmother's row house scribbling equations into old composition books. His mother worked double shifts at the hospital, and his father had drifted out of his life before Elijah learned long division. Numbers had been his constant companion, predictable, fair, and unbending. A number never cared about the color of his skin. 2 plus 2 would always equal 4. By high school, he was tutoring classmates twice his age. By senior year, he had solved problems in competitions that stumped judges. His guidance counselor told him to apply to community college. His math teacher told him to aim higher. He listened to the teacher, and when the acceptance letter from Hawthorne University arrived, Elijah felt as if he had broken through a wall no one thought he could climb. Now here he was, inside one of the most prestigious lecture halls in the country, determined to prove that his place here wasn't charity. It was merit. He wanted to graduate with honors, maybe even pursue graduate studies, and eventually teach to show kids back home that math wasn't just for other people. But every time Dr. Whitmore looked at him, Elijah felt that dream bending under invisible pressure. That morning, the lecture unfolded in Whitmore's usual style. Rigid, impatient, more performance than teaching. He filled the board with elegant lines of calculus, speaking as if half the students were intruding on his private conversation with himself. Hands shot up occasionally, timid and careful. When a white student asked a question, Whitmore paused, leaned forward, and explained with measured clarity. When Elijah raised his hand, Whitmore's gaze hardened. "Yes, Carter." Elijah swallowed, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I think there might be a simpler way to break down the integral here. If Whitmore cut him off with a dismissive flick of chalk. "We're not here to discuss shortcuts. Follow the prescribed steps. That's how mathematics is taught." A few students glanced at Elijah, some sympathetic, others smirking. Elijah felt his cheeks heat, but scribbled quietly in his notebook, refusing to let Whitmore's tone break him. Still, the sting lingered. The weeks passed, and the pattern grew clearer. His first assignment came back with a C- scrawled in red. Though he knew he had solved every question, he compared answers with his classmate Ryan, who admitted, "Dude, yours is cleaner than mine. I don't know how I got a B." Elijah laughed it off, but his chest tightened. The second assignment, another low mark. "Work incomplete," Whitmore wrote, though Elijah's pages were filled corner to corner. The third, "Poor reasoning." The words cut deeper than the grade itself. Still, Elijah pushed harder. He spent nights in the library, surrounded by towers of textbooks, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing in his ears. He scribbled problems until his pencil left grooves in the paper. Marcus, his roommate, would peek in and shake his head. "Man, you're going to burn yourself out. I can't afford to slip." Elijah muttered. "It's not you slipping," Marcus said quietly. It's him pushing. Elijah didn't answer. He wanted to believe effort could overcome bias, that if he worked hard enough, Whitmore would have no choice but to recognize his ability. Numbers didn't lie. By the time the first major exam approached, Elijah was running on black coffee and determination. He had mapped out every possible type of problem, drilled himself on tricky integrals, even timed himself to simulate test conditions. On exam day, his hands trembled slightly as he picked up the paper, but his mind steadied once the numbers appeared. He worked methodically, filling page after page with precise calculations. Each solution flowed into the next, his pencil gliding with confidence. When the clock signaled the end, he set his paper down with the faintest smile. For the first time all semester, he felt untouchable. Days later, Whitmore entered the lecture hall with a stack of graded exams. The room buzzed with anticipation. Elijah sat upright, heart thudding, certain that this time his effort would be undeniable. Whitmore moved down the aisles, slapping papers onto desks without a word. Ryan grinned as he glanced at his score, an A-. The girl in front of Elijah whispered, "I did way worse than I thought. Still got a B." Then Whitmore's shadow loomed over Elijah. He placed the paper face down, almost gently, before moving on without a glance. Elijah flipped it over. The breath left his body. Across the top, in thick, crimson ink, one single letter sprawled like a wound. F. Not just a grade. A verdict. And beneath it, a scribbled note in Whitmore's sharp handwriting. Inconsistent work. Lacks understanding. Elijah's eyes blurred. He read the comment again, and again, until the words seemed to burn through the page. He had solved everything. Step by step. Flawless. He knew it. And yet here it was, the first red mark. The room spun with murmurs of relief and disappointment. But Elijah sat frozen, the paper trembling in his hands. He felt the weight of every stare, every whispered doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe he didn't belong here. But deep inside, a flicker of something else stirred. Rage, sharp and undeniable. Still, that flicker barely had time to grow before he realized something that made his stomach sink even further. Ryan's exam, the one with an A-, had the exact same problem Elijah had solved, nearly identical in method. And yet, Elijah had failed. Elijah clenched his exam, a knot forming in his chest as a terrifying thought took root. What if Whitmore hadn't made a mistake at all? What if the failure was deliberate? Elijah sat frozen at his desk, the red F glaring back at him like an accusation. Around him, the lecture hall hummed with nervous chatter as students compared scores. Some groaned, others chuckled with relief, but every sound pressed heavier against his chest. He tried to steady his breathing, but the paper shook in his hand. Behind him, someone whispered just loud enough for him to hear. Knew it. Too advanced for some people. A stifled laugh followed. Elijah's head turned instinctively, but the two boys behind him quickly buried their faces in their papers, pretending to review notes. His ears burned hot, though his face remained still. He gathered his books slowly, willing himself not to react. Whitmore continued lecturing at the front as if nothing had happened, his chalk scratching against the board. The indifference was louder than any insult. When the bell finally rang, Elijah slipped into the hallway, clutching the failed test. Students spilled out in clusters, comparing grades like trading cards. Got a B+, one girl boasted. Man, I didn't even study and pulled a C, another bragged. Elijah kept his head down. Ryan jogged up beside him, holding his own paper. Yo, man, I thought you killed that test. What'd you get? Elijah hesitated, then turned his exam over just enough for Ryan to see. The red letter seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. Ryan's jaw dropped. Thup. No way. Dude, we studied half of this together. Our answers looked the same, almost identical, Elijah said quietly. Ryan scratched his head, confusion written across his face. That's messed up. My steps were even sloppy. I skipped half the explanations. You had everything lined up neat. Elijah tried to smile, but it cracked. Guess neatness doesn't count. They walked in silence until Ryan veered off to his dorm. Elijah continued alone, the paper burning against his palm like evidence of a crime no one wanted to acknowledge. Back in his room, Marcus looked up from his laptop when Elijah entered. How'd the test go? Elijah dropped the paper on Marcus's desk without a word. Marcus scanned it, his eyes narrowing. This makes no sense. Tell me about it. No. I mean, this isn't random. I've heard things about Whitmore. Marcus leaned back, folding his arms. He's got this reputation, likes to weed out students early, and not just any students. Elijah's chest tightened. What do you mean? Marcus hesitated, lowering his voice, though no one else was in the room. You ever notice the kind of people he singles out? Jasmine from last year, Devon before that. All of them, black or brown students, they either dropped the class or changed majors after him. Elijah stared at him, disbelief battling with the sick recognition forming in his gut. He wanted to dismiss it as rumor, but Marcus's tone carried the weight of truth.
You think he's targeting me?
I think he's been doing it for years, Marcus said flatly. Elijah sank onto his bed, the room suddenly smaller, air thinner. He remembered Whitmore's eyes the first day, the dismissive tone, the red ink bleeding across every assignment. It wasn't just in his head. For the first time, he let himself consider the possibility that the failure was never about math. That night, Elijah spread his exam papers across his desk. He borrowed Ryan's test for comparison, laying them side by side. The parallels were undeniable. Same method, same final answers. Ryan's scribbles were barely legible. Elijah's were precise, organized, yet Ryan earned an A-, while Elijah was branded with failure. The injustice was like a stone in his throat, choking him. He traced the red marks across his paper, noticing something chilling. Whitmore hadn't even corrected mistakes because there weren't any. The deductions seemed arbitrary, as if Whitmore had been searching for excuses rather than errors. Inconsistent work, lax understanding, empty accusations, vague enough to justify anything. Elijah pushed his chair back, pacing the room. His mind replayed the whispers in the hall. Too advanced for some people. Were they just mocking him? Or had they absorbed Whitmore's silent judgment too? Was the professor planting doubt in the minds of his classmates, slowly eroding Elijah's credibility? He sat back down, gripping his pencil so tightly it nearly snapped. Marcus, he said suddenly, what if I document everything? Every test, every assignment, every comment he makes. If there's a pattern, it'll show. Marcus looked up. You're thinking long-term. I'm thinking survival. Just be careful, man. Whitmore isn't the type to play fair. If he senses you're onto him, he'll push harder. Elijah nodded, but said nothing. His determination outweighed his fear. If Whitmore thought he could quietly erase him from the class, he was wrong. The following week, Elijah returned to class with his notebook primed, not just for calculus, but for evidence. He logged the questions Whitmore answered thoroughly, versus the ones he dismissed. He tracked the tones, the pauses, the subtle differences in how students were treated. Patterns emerged quickly. White students received patience, even encouragement. Black and brown students received sharp corrections or silence. One Latina student, Sophia, raised her hand timidly during lecture. Whitmore ignored her until a white student repeated her question. Then he answered in detail. Elijah's stomach nodded as he scribbled the moment down. It wasn't just him. It was a system of erasure, so quiet most wouldn't notice. After class, Sophia caught up with Elijah. Did you notice how he? She stopped, glancing around nervously. Never mind. Elijah met her eyes. You're not imagining it. She studied him, as if deciding whether to trust him, then nodded silently before walking away. That night Elijah and Marcus compared notes again. Marcus leaned back, whistling low. You've got enough here to build a case already. But a case against who? Elijah said bitterly. A tenured professor who the university worships. It's my word against his. Not if you keep collecting proof. Elijah exhaled, staring at his exam again. He knew Marcus was right. But the thought of months of fighting, of whispers turning into rumors, of being branded a troublemaker, it made his chest heavy. Still, the alternative was worse. Silence. The next day, Elijah made a decision. He asked Ryan if he could borrow his exam for the evening. Ryan agreed without hesitation, curious but supportive. Back in his room, Elijah spread the two tests out under the lamp again. His eyes scanned every line, every notation. The similarities were undeniable, almost eerie. Identical solutions, parallel steps. But then Elijah noticed something he hadn't before. On Ryan's test, a minor error in notation, a missing negative sign, had gone unmarked. On his own, Elijah had included the negative sign correctly, yet Whitmore had circled it in red and written, concept misunderstood. Elijah froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. This wasn't bias hidden in subtlety anymore. This was deliberate misrepresentation. He sat back staring at the two papers, realization crashing over him. Whitmore hadn't just graded unfairly. He had falsified Elijah's mistakes. Elijah's hands trembled as he photographed both tests side by side. For the first time, he had undeniable proof. But if Whitmore learned he was collecting evidence, what would he do next? The side-by-side exams lay under Elijah's desk lamp, like a crime scene. His heart still raced each time his eyes landed on the circled notation, the deliberate twisting of his accuracy into misunderstanding. Proof, cold, undeniable proof, that Dr. Whitmore wasn't simply careless. He was intent on erasing Elijah's effort. Marcus leaned against the bed frame, arms folded, studying Elijah's face more than the papers. You gonna confront him? Elijah hesitated, fingers tapping the edge of the desk. He could feel the weight of every warning Marcus had given him. Still, the red ink mocked him in silence. I have to, Elijah said at last. If I don't say something, it's like I'm agreeing with him. Just don't go in swinging. He'll twist it, make you look emotional, irrational. Elijah nodded, though he wasn't sure how calm he could stay when his future felt like it was being strangled in red ink. The next afternoon, he climbed the steps to Whitmore's office. The hallway was quiet, echoing with the faint hum of fluorescent lights. He paused at the door, the gold plate reading Dr. Charles Whitmore, Department of Mathematics. The letters gleamed like a warning. He knocked. Come in, came the clipped voice. The office was immaculate. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with thick tomes and journals, their spines perfectly aligned. A framed certificate from Princeton hung above the desk, angled to catch the light. Behind the oak desk sat Whitmore, glasses perched on his nose, pen in hand as if Elijah had interrupted something monumental. Yes, Carter, Whitmore said without looking up. Make it quick. Elijah swallowed, stepping forward. I wanted to talk about the exam. I compared my answers with another student's. Whitmore's head lifted sharply, his eyes narrowing. Comparing answers outside of grading is not only inappropriate, it's against academic protocol. Elijah blinked, startled. I wasn't cheating, sir. Our answers were nearly the same, but I received an F. He placed the papers on the desk, side by side. I was hoping you could explain. Whitmore leaned back slowly, studying Elijah with something closer to amusement than concern. He didn't glance at the papers. Carter, he said, his tone dipped in false patience. Mathematics is not about copying steps. It's about demonstrating mastery. Your work shows inconsistency, a lack of discipline. But the solutions are correct, Elijah pressed, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. Even the notation you marked wrong was correct. Whitmore's lips tightened, though his eyes gleamed. You may believe you're correct, but understanding calculus requires more than memorizing mechanics. It requires intellectual maturity. The words landed heavy, disguised as academic critique, but steeped in something uglier. Elijah recognized it instantly. A dismissal not of his work, but of him. I've been working on this for weeks, Elijah said, quieter now, though his voice trembled with restrained anger. If there's something I need to improve, I'm open to hearing it, but failing me when the answers are right. Whitmore cut him off with a wave of his hand, sharp as a blade. Let me give you some advice, Carter. Engineering, mathematics, these are not easy fields. Many bright students, realize at some point that perhaps this path isn't theirs. Elijah froze, his breath caught. The words weren't advice, they were a dismissal wrapped in condescension. Are you suggesting I should drop the class? He asked, his voice low. Whitmore offered a thin smile. I'm suggesting you spare yourself further disappointment. There is no shame in recognizing limitations. It's better than failing harder down the line. Elijah's chest burned, rage clawing at the edges of his composure. He wanted to shout, to slam his fist on the polished desk, to demand fairness, but Marcus's warning echoed in his mind. He'll make you look irrational. So Elijah steadied his breathing, forcing his voice into calm. With respect, sir, I know my capabilities. I'm not dropping this class. Whitmore's eyes hardened, the smile vanishing. Then you'll have to live with the consequences. The silence between them was suffocating. Elijah gathered his papers slowly, his hands trembling despite his effort to appear composed. He turned to leave, his heart pounding like a drum. As he stepped into the hallway, Voices drifted from the partially open door of the office, next to Whitmore's. He froze mid-step. "Another one?" a male colleague asked, his tone light, almost amused. Whitmore's voice followed, calm but laced with certainty. "He'll never pass under me." The words struck Elijah like a punch to the gut. His ears rang, his vision blurred. He gripped the railing of the hallway, struggling to steady himself. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't overthinking. Whitmore had said it aloud, without hesitation, without shame. Not he might not pass. Not he's struggling. He'll never pass under me. The difference was damning. Elijah staggered away from the door, his legs heavy, his throat dry. Rage surged hot and undeniable. But so did fear. If Whitmore was confident enough to speak like that to a colleague, it meant this wasn't a secret. It was policy. Quiet, unspoken, but reinforced by power. He walked out of the building, the cold air slapping his face, his fists clenched around the exam papers. Proof of bias lived not just in red ink, but now in words, whispered behind cracked doors. The university prided itself on integrity, but what chance did one black student have against a tenured professor shielded by reputation and status? Elijah thought of his mother's sacrifices, the endless hours she worked so he could attend Hawthorne. He thought of his grandmother's prayers whispered into his ear before he left Baltimore. He thought of the boys back home who teased him for being the math kid, and how he wanted to prove them wrong. Now all of it felt fragile. But as his pulse steadied, something hardened inside him. If Whitmore thought Elijah would quietly fade out like the students before him, he was wrong. Elijah's path would not be erased. That night, Elijah sat at his desk, replaying Whitmore's words over and over, until one thought carved itself into his mind like stone. If he's decided I'll never pass, then I need to find a way to win where his rules no longer matter. Elijah sat at his desk long after the campus had gone quiet, the ticking of his clock filling the room like a metronome. The words he'd overheard outside Whitmore's office replayed on a loop in his head. "He'll never pass under me." They were more than words. They were a sentence, a plan, a deliberate promise of failure. He pulled out his notebook and flipped to a clean page. If Whitmore was determined to bury him under red ink, then Elijah would build his own record. Every grade, every comment, every subtle slight, documented. If Whitmore wanted silence, Elijah would counter with evidence. The next morning, Elijah began his quiet work. After every lecture, he wrote down what questions were asked, who asked them, and how Whitmore responded. When a white student miscalculated a derivative, Whitmore chuckled, corrected them gently, and praised their good intuition. When a black student made the same mistake, Whitmore sighed loudly, as though the error were an embarrassment. Elijah jotted it down word for word. On assignments, he made copies before submitting. That way when the paper came back slashed with red, he had proof of what he had originally written. Slowly, his binder filled with a double record. One set of his actual work, one set of Whitmore's judgment. Patterns began to emerge like cracks in plaster. Elijah wasn't alone. He noticed Sophia again, the Latina student who'd raised her hand, only to be ignored until a white classmate repeated her question. Her homework came back bruised with C's and D's, despite neat, logical steps. Meanwhile, another student named Jared turned in half-finished work and still earned B's. After class, Elijah approached Sophia carefully. "Hey," he said, holding his notebook. "Have you noticed the way he grades?" Sophia's eyes darted around the hallway before landing on him. "You mean how some people get away with things the rest of us don't?" "Exactly." She let out a shaky laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I thought it was just me. Last week I got marked wrong for missing a tiny step, but the guy next to me didn't even finish the problem. He got a B-." Elijah showed her his binder, the copied assignments. "I'm keeping track. It's not just us." Sophia's smile faltered. "Be careful. People don't talk about this stuff. Not here." "Why not?" Elijah asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because nothing changes," she whispered. Then she turned away, walking quickly down the hall. Her words sank into him like lead. "Nothing changes." The resignation in her voice was heavier than any grade. But Elijah couldn't accept silence. That evening, Marcus leaned over Elijah's growing binder. "You're building a whole case here," he muttered. "This could be bigger than just you." "Then why hasn't anyone said anything before?" Elijah asked. Marcus hesitated, then closed his laptop. Because I've heard stories, man. Students who pushed back just disappeared. Not literally, but academically. GPA ruined, recommendations gone, doors shut. Whitmore's been here 20 years. People know better than to fight him. Elijah shook his head, anger building. So we're just supposed to let him keep destroying people's futures? Marcus's silence was an answer. In the weeks that followed, Elijah's binder thickened. Each page carried the weight of injustice. Sophia's exams, his own flawless solutions marked inconsistent, another black student's paper labeled careless despite correct answers. It wasn't random, it was systemic. And yet no one spoke openly. He tried asking around, discreetly. A junior majoring in physics lowered his voice when Elijah mentioned Whitmore's name. Yeah, man. I had him freshman year. Dropped to class after the first midterm. You didn't want to wreck my GPA. But hey, you didn't hear that from me. Another shrugged him off entirely. Look, Whitmore's tough on everyone. Don't make it a thing. But Elijah could see the fear in their eyes, the quickness to change the subject. The silence was the system's shield. One night in the library, while sorting through old exam copies, Elijah overheard two seniors at the next table. You remember Jasmine? One whispered.
The girl from Atlanta? Yeah.
She was killing it in math until Whitmore tanked her GPA. She switched to sociology. Could have gone to grad school too. Shame. Elijah's ears sharpened at the name. Jasmine. The next day he tracked her down through a mutual friend. She had graduated the year before but still lived in the city, working at a tech startup. He reached out nervously, half expecting no reply. To his surprise, she agreed to meet. They sat in a small cafe off campus, the clink of coffee cups filling the pauses between words. Jasmine was sharp-eyed, her braids pulled neatly back, but there was a heaviness in her posture, a weight she seemed to carry into every gesture. So you've met Whitmore, she said flatly, stirring her tea. Elijah nodded. He's failing me. Deliberately. I have proof. And I've heard your name. Jasmine laughed bitterly. Of course you have. She set her spoon down with a soft clink. He ruined me. Elijah leaned forward. What happened? She looked past him, her eyes distant. I went into his class with a 3.9 GPA. I was confident. Then suddenly, assignments came back with grades that didn't make sense. He told me I lacked discipline, that maybe math wasn't my field. I fought back, asked questions, but it only got worse. Her voice cracked slightly, though she forced it steady. By the end of the semester, my GPA dropped so low I lost my scholarship. Years of work gone. I had to switch majors just to graduate on time. Elijah's stomach twisted. He saw himself reflected in her words, a mirror of his own unraveling. Why didn't you report him? He asked softly. Jasmine's eyes met his, filled with both fire and exhaustion. To who? The department. They protect their own. Everyone told me not to make waves, that Whitmore was untouchable. I tried once, went to the dean. Do you know what she said? Elijah shook his head. She told me I needed to develop resilience if I wanted to succeed in rigorous fields. Jasmine's voice dripped with disgust. Resilience, as if surviving his sabotage was part of the curriculum. The words hit Elijah harder than he expected. It wasn't just about grades. It was about erasure, about being told to accept unfairness as normal. Jasmine's composure finally broke. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. I worked so damn hard, and he erased me like I was nothing. Elijah's throat tightened. He reached across the table, not touching her hand, but leaving his palm close enough to show solidarity. You weren't nothing, and you're not alone anymore. Jasmine lowered her hands, tears streaking her cheeks. You think you can beat him? He's been doing this for years. Elijah's voice was quiet, but resolute. Then maybe it's time someone stopped him. For a moment silence hung between them, heavy and raw. Jasmine studied him, as if weighing whether he was naive or truly determined. Finally she exhaled. If you're serious, I still have my old exams. They're buried in a box somewhere, but the marks are there. Just like yours. Elijah's pulse quickened. Would you share them with me? Jasmine nodded slowly. If it helps prove he's not just destroying one student at a time. The weight of her words settled on Elijah's chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every student Whitmore had quietly erased. Every dream he had strangled with red ink and condescension. And now Elijah had his first ally. Later that night, Elijah spread Jasmine's old exams beside his own, and the patterns were terrifyingly identical. But at the bottom of one paper, in Whitmore's handwriting, Elijah noticed something chilling. A comment not just about her work, but about her character. Words that crossed the line from academic critique into something personal, even malicious. The old exams from Jasmine lay spread across Elijah's desk like pieces of a crime scene. The handwriting was different. The problems varied, but the red marks were hauntingly familiar. The same dismissive comments, the same vague criticisms, inconsistent reasoning, lax depth, unconvincing. And then there was the one that made Elijah's stomach drop. On the margin of Jasmine's paper, in Whitmore's sharp script, were 4 words that had nothing to do with calculus at all. Not disciplined. Not serious. It wasn't an academic critique. It was an attack on her character, her worth. Elijah sat frozen, his chest tightening. He thought of Jasmine's trembling hands at the cafe, the way she whispered that Whitmore had erased her. Now he saw it, in ink. The professor hadn't just undermined her grades, he had written her off as a person. Elijah snapped photos of the exams, storing them carefully in his binder. His collection of evidence was growing, but so was the weight on his shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving a system wrong that had quietly destroyed countless students before him. But to do that, he would need more than proof. He would need power. That night, as the campus settled into silence, Elijah sat at his desk with a fresh notebook. He flipped past the pages filled with Whitmore's cruelty and turned to a blank sheet. The clean white space seemed to whisper possibility. He thought about all the times he'd been dismissed for shortcuts. The times Whitmore had sneered when Elijah tried to propose a different approach. But Elijah knew he wasn't wrong. Math wasn't about rigid steps. It was about understanding patterns, seeing the architecture beneath the surface. So he began to build something of his own. At first it was just sketches, different ways of arranging equations, compressing multi-step problems into streamlined flows. Instead of grinding through line after line of algebra, he experimented with reorganizing the logic, so that the solution unfolded more naturally. Hours slipped into dawn. Elijah scribbled, erased, rewrote, tested. He pulled textbooks from his shelf, cross-referencing standard methods with his own. To his astonishment, not only did his shortcuts work, they were often faster, cleaner, and easier to follow. It wasn't about skipping steps. It was about reimagining them. When Marcus wandered in from a late-night study session and saw Elijah hunched over his desk, he whistled. "Man, you look like you're writing a whole new Bible." Elijah didn't look up, his pencil racing. "Maybe I am," Marcus chuckled, then leaned closer. His eyes widened at the pages filled with equations, arrows, and annotations. "Wait, you're not just solving problems. You're inventing a system." Elijah paused, the realization hitting him as Marcus spoke. That's exactly what he was doing. "It's like a method," Elijah said slowly, the words forming as he felt them. "Not just for me, for anyone. If this works, it could make calculus more accessible, especially for students who struggle with the long mechanical steps." Marcus's smile faded into awe. "Do you realize what this means? You're not just passing his class, you're creating something new." Elijah shook his head, though pride flickered beneath his exhaustion. "It doesn't matter if he refuses to see it. If Whitmore wants to fail me, he'll fail me no matter what I write." Marcus crossed his arms. "Yeah, but if this method is real, if it holds up, then he can't erase you. Not forever." Elijah wanted to believe that, but fear lingered like a shadow at the edge of his determination. For the next 2 weeks, Elijah lived inside his notebook. He skipped meals, lost track of time, filling page after page with test cases. He pulled problem sets from the library archives, solved them using both the traditional approach and his new method, then compared results. Each time, his answers matched, and each time, his method proved not only correct, but efficient. He gave it structure. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. An alternative map through the chaos of calculus. A language of logic that made sense to him in a way the rigid prescribed steps never had. One night, frustrated by a particularly messy problem, he muttered to himself, "There has to be a cleaner way." He adjusted his steps, rewrote the order, and suddenly the solution fell into place like a puzzle snapping shut. Elijah laughed out loud, startling Marcus awake from a nap on the couch.
You good?
Marcus asked groggily. Elijah held up the notebook, eyes alight. "It works. Again." Marcus rubbed his eyes, grinning. Man, you're onto something. This isn't just about proving Whitmore wrong. This is bigger. But Elijah's expression darkened. What if none of it matters? What if he still marks me wrong? He's already decided who I am. Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then you use his own weapon against him. You put it on the exam. You solve every problem with your method. Clean, undeniable. And when he tries to fail you, you'll know it's not about the math. The idea lodged in Elijah's chest like a seed. Risky, maybe reckless, but powerful. He kept refining until the next exam loomed. His notebook had become a manual, a living document of discovery. He knew he had something special, something that could change the way students approached calculus. But fear gnawed at him. He imagined handing in the test, knowing Whitmore's pen would hover like a guillotine no matter how precise his answers. He imagined another red F, another round of whispers about how he didn't belong. But he also imagined something else, walking into that exam with a weapon Whitmore didn't expect. A method no one could deny. The morning of the test arrived cold and gray, the kind of day that seemed to weigh on your shoulders before it even began. Elijah walked to the lecture hall with his notebook clutched tight, heart pounding. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Students shuffled nervously, pencils tapping against desks. Whitmore stood at the front, distributing exam papers with his usual air of superiority. When his gaze passed over Elijah, it lingered for a fraction of a second, a ghost of a smirk crossing his face. Elijah sat, opened the exam, and scanned the problems. Integrals, derivatives, proofs, all familiar, all painstakingly rehearsed. His hand steadied as he picked up his pencil. This was it. He began writing, not the prescribed steps Whitmore demanded, but his own method, clean, precise, efficient. The numbers unfolded exactly as he had practiced, each answer emerging with clarity. He moved faster than ever before, confidence rising with every line. Around him, students fumbled, scribbled, erased. Elijah flowed. By the time the proctor called time, his paper was filled edge to edge with his new system. He set his pencil down, chest heaving, eyes burning with exhaustion and adrenaline. As he handed in his paper, Whitmore's eyes met his. A flicker of something unrateable passed between them. Dismissal, maybe suspicion, maybe both. Elijah walked out into the crisp air, the weight of weeks pressing down on him. He had done it. He had used the method no one saw coming. But fear whispered in the back of his mind. Would Whitmore see innovation? Or just another excuse to fail him? Days later, as Elijah sat in lecture waiting for the exams to be returned, Whitmore's hand hovered just a moment longer over his desk before dropping the paper face down. Elijah's heart pounded as he reached for it, uncertain if he had just rewritten the rules of calculus or sealed his own downfall. The lecture hall was unusually quiet that morning, the air thick with nervous energy. Students sat forward in their chairs, restless pencils, tapping against desktops, as Dr. Whitmore strolled in with a stack of graded exams tucked neatly under his arm. His gait was steady, almost smug, as though the outcome of the test was a performance he had already rehearsed. Elijah's pulse hammered in his throat. He sat straighter, his palms pressed against his knees, to stop the shaking. For days he had replayed every step of the exam in his mind, each calculation unfolding as clearly as it had that morning. He had used his method flawlessly, streamlined, logical, efficient. He had left no room for error. This was supposed to be the moment he proved himself. Whitmore began moving through the aisles, handing papers back one by one. Pages rustled as students flipped their exams, groans and sighs filling the room. Some smiled in relief. Others whispered about small mistakes they had gotten away with. Ryan, sitting a row ahead, leaned back just enough for Elijah to see his score. A neat B+ scrawled in red. Elijah glanced at the messy scrawl of Ryan's work, mistakes corrected in the margins, entire steps skipped, and yet it was considered good enough. Then Whitmore reached Elijah's desk. He paused, eyes locking with his for a fraction of a second, sharp, knowing, almost amused. Without a word, he placed the exam face down and continued walking. Elijah's chest tightened. He reached for the paper with trembling fingers and turned it over. There it was. The red ink screamed across the page like a wound, cutting deeper than the first time. Beneath it, a note in Whitmore's cold, slanted script. Unorthodox, lacks rigor, method invalid. Elijah's breath caught. He scanned his work desperately, line by line. Every answer was correct. Every step led precisely to the solution. His method had worked. Perfectly. Just as he had designed. Yet Whitmore hadn't graded the answers at all. He had dismissed the entire approach. A heat spread through Elijah's chest. Part fury, part despair. Around him, classmates whispered, "Did you hear? He failed again. Man, maybe he should just drop. Guess he can't handle Whitmore." The words buzzed in Elijah's ears, louder than the scratching of chalk on the board, as Whitmore began his lecture as if nothing unusual had happened. Elijah sat frozen, his exam burning under his hand, shame and anger twisting together until he felt sick. After class, Ryan caught up with him in the hallway. "Dude, what the hell? How did you fail? You had that down." Elijah showed him the paper. Ryan's brow furrowed as he read the note. "Method invalid? That's not even a thing. If the answers are right, they're right." "Not to him," Elijah muttered, voice thick with bitterness. Ryan lowered his voice. "Look, I'm not trying to stir stuff up, but it feels like he's got it out for you." Elijah's jaw clenched. "Feels like." Ryan sighed. "Okay, he does. Anyone can see it. But, man, what were you gonna do? He's the professor." That was the question Elijah couldn't shake. What could he do? Each red mark wasn't just a grade. It was a gate slamming shut. His GPA was slipping, his future narrowing. And yet, the more Whitmore tried to erase him, the harder Elijah clung to the truth. His work was real. His method was real. Back in his dorm, Elijah spread his exams out across the desk, the binder growing heavier with each unfair grade. Jasmine's papers sat alongside his, the parallels undeniable. He stared at them until the numbers blurred, his mind racing. Marcus dropped into the chair across from him. "You okay?" "No." Elijah's voice cracked. "He failed me again, even though everything was correct. He didn't even look at the answers. He just wrote me off." Marcus leaned forward, studying the red ink. "Unorthodox? That's his excuse? Man, this is worse than I thought. He's not grading you. He's trying to erase you." Elijah buried his face in his hands. "I've done everything right. I've studied. I've built this method. I've worked harder than anyone in that class. And still," his voice faltered, "still, he's decided I'll never pass." Elijah lifted his head, eyes burning. "What do you mean? You've got something he can't control. This method. You said yourself it works. You've tested it against textbooks, examples, everything. Maybe it's time someone else sees it. Someone beyond him." The suggestion hung in the air, dangerous and electrifying. Elijah had thought about it before, in passing. What if his method was bigger than a grade? What if it could help students who, like him, felt shut out by the rigid structures of traditional calculus? But fear always dragged him back. What if no one believed him? What if they laughed him off? Or worse, accused him of faking it? Who would even listen? Elijah asked quietly. Not Whitmore, but maybe another professor. Someone who actually cares about students. Marcus leaned closer. "You've got proof, Elijah. Not just of his bias, but of your brilliance. Don't let him bury that." Elijah stared at the pages scattered before him. Each equation was a testament to nights of sweat and exhaustion, to the stubborn refusal to give up. Whitmore's ink had tried to silence him, but the numbers told a different story. Slowly, a new thought began to form in Elijah's mind. Not just survival, but defiance. If Whitmore was determined to destroy him, then Elijah's only chance was to make his method undeniable to someone Whitmore couldn't control. That night, Elijah opened his notebook again, but this time, with a new purpose. He began polishing his method, writing it out cleanly, step by step, as if preparing to teach it. He added examples, annotated his reasoning, even drew diagrams where they clarified the logic. His notebook transformed into something more than notes. It became a manifesto. Yet doubt gnawed at him. What if another professor dismissed it just as easily? What if Whitmore's shadow reached further than he imagined? But then he remembered Jasmine's tearful confession. "He ruined me." He thought of Sophia's resigned whisper. "Nothing changes." He thought of every red F that had branded him a failure. Despite his effort, he couldn't stay silent. The clock ticked past midnight, as Elijah wrote until his hand cramped, the pages filling with clarity and conviction. By dawn, his method was laid out in full structured, undeniable, ready to be seen. Exhausted but resolute, Elijah closed the notebook and set it on the desk. His path forward was clear, even if it was risky. Whitmore could keep failing him, But Elijah would not let Whitmore be the only judge of his worth. The next morning, Elijah slipped his notebook into his backpack with trembling hands. For the first time, he wasn't walking toward Whitmore's class. He was walking past it, determined to place his work into the hands of someone who might finally see him. The notebook felt heavier than any textbook Elijah had ever carried. He clutched it close to his chest as he walked across campus, his eyes darting from building to building. For once, he wasn't heading to Whitmore's lecture. He was heading somewhere else, somewhere that might change everything. The mathematics department stretched across two wings of the university, its halls lined with portraits of past professors. Elijah's stomach twisted each time his eyes met those frozen, painted gazes. White men in stiff suits, names engraved in gold beneath their frames. It was a gallery of legacy, a reminder of who had been allowed to shape the field. But not everyone in that building looked like the portraits. There was Dr. Anika Patel. Elijah had heard whispers about her from other students. Fair, approachable, unafraid to challenge tradition. She was younger than most of the staff, barely a decade older than Elijah himself, but her reputation was already strong. Unlike Whitmore, who ruled his lectures like a tyrant, Patel was said to actually listen. Elijah found himself standing outside her office, his heart pounding so loud he feared she would hear it through the door. He hesitated, doubt gnawing at him. What if she dismissed him too? What if she saw his method as a childish trick, or worse, went straight to Whitmore? But then he remembered Jasmine's tears, Sophia's silence, the red F bleeding across his exam. He couldn't turn back now. He knocked. "Come in," a warm voice called. The office was smaller than Whitmore's but lived in, with books stacked in uneven towers, papers pinned haphazardly to corkboards, and a faint smell of chai in the air. Behind the desk sat Dr. Patel, her dark hair tied in a loose bun, glasses sliding down her nose as she looked up from a stack of essays. "Hi," she said, setting her pen aside. "Elijah, right? From Whitmore's calculus section." Elijah froze. "You know me." Patel smiled gently. "I make it a point to know my students, even if they're not in my class. You've got a reputation for asking the tough questions." Her words sent a ripple of warmth through Elijah's chest, but he forced himself to focus. "I need your help. It's about Whitmore." Her expression sobered instantly. "Close the door." Elijah obeyed, the click of the latch sounding final. He sat across from her, laying his notebook on the desk like an offering. His hands trembled as he opened it to the exam pages. "This is my test," he said, voice low. "He failed me. But the answers are right." And this, he flipped through the pages of his notebook, showing his streamlined steps. "This is how I solved them." Patel leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. She scanned the exam silently at first, her brow furrowing. Then she flipped to Elijah's notes. Her eyes widened. "Wait," she murmured, tracing a line of his work with her finger. "This isn't wrong. This is efficient." She looked up sharply. "Where did you learn this?" "I didn't," Elijah said. "I built it. I've been working on it for weeks. I thought if I could make the process clearer, easier to follow, maybe students who struggle with the traditional steps could finally get it." Patel sat back, stunned. "Elijah, this is remarkable. You've restructured standard calculus solutions. Not by skipping steps but by reorganizing logic. It's clean. It's innovative." Elijah's throat tightened, emotion pressing at his chest. For the first time, someone was seeing what he saw, not failure, not a shortcut, but brilliance. "But he failed me," Elijah whispered. "He didn't even look at the answers. He wrote that my method was invalid." Patel closed the notebook softly, her expression grave. "I believe you, and I believe this work deserves recognition." "But," she hesitated, her voice dropping, "you need to be careful. Whitmore is powerful here. He's been in this department for decades. Going against him could end me." Elijah finished, bitterness lacing his tone. Patel nodded reluctantly. "And not just you. He's the type to protect himself at any cost. He has allies. If you openly challenge him, they'll close ranks." Elijah clenched his fists. "So what do I do, just keep taking his abuse? Let him destroy me?" Patel's eyes softened. "No. You don't give up. You keep documenting everything. Every grade, every comment, every pattern. Build your case, quietly, and keep refining your method. If it's as strong as I think it is, it'll speak louder than his red pen." Elijah's eyes stung, though he refused to let tears fall. For weeks he had carried the weight of doubt, of whispers, of failure. Now, sitting in Patel's office, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: validation. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Patel leaned forward, her gaze firm. "Elijah, don't quit. That's what he wants. And don't let his voice drown out yours." He nodded, clutching his notebook to his chest once more. For the first time, he felt less alone. As Elijah walked back across campus, a strange mixture of hope and dread filled him. Patel had given him encouragement, yes, but also a warning. Whitmore wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous. And now Elijah knew that if he kept pushing, he was stepping into a fight much bigger than grades. Days passed. Elijah threw himself deeper into his work, recording Whitmore's actions with precision, testing and retesting his method late into the night. Each page of his binder grew heavier with evidence, each line of his notebook sharper with clarity. But then, one evening, as he returned to his dorm, something unusual caught his eye. His door was slightly ajar. His stomach clenched. He pushed it open slowly. The room was dark, quiet, nothing out of place except for one slip of paper lying on the floor just inside the door. Elijah bent to pick it up. His hands went cold as he read the words scrawled in jagged black ink. "Stop pushing, or you'll regret it." The note slipped from his fingers, landing soundlessly on the floor. His heart pounded in his ears, his breath shallow. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't just academic sabotage anymore. Someone wanted him silenced. Elijah stared at the note in the dim light of his dorm room. A single thought clawing at his chest. If Whitmore knew about Patel, had he already decided to destroy them both? The threatening note sat folded in Elijah's binder like a live wire. He hadn't shown it to anyone, not even Marcus. Each time he looked at the jagged handwriting, "Stop pushing, or you'll regret it," a chill ran through him. Whoever wrote it knew he was collecting evidence, knew he had an ally. And yet, he refused to stop. The university had announced a midterm review session, a voluntary gathering, where students could work through practice problems with the guidance of the professor. For Whitmore, it was a chance to show off his command of the subject. For Elijah, it felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. Marcus noticed his tension as they walked toward Hamilton Hall. "You don't have to go, you know. Review sessions are optional." Elijah shook his head. "If I don't show up, it looks like I'm hiding. If I do show up, maybe I finally get the chance to prove myself in front of everyone." Marcus frowned. "Or he makes an example out of you." Elijah swallowed hard, but his pace didn't slow. "Then let him. I'm done being erased in silence." The lecture hall was buzzing when they entered. Students sprawled across the seats, some chatting, others already scribbling equations on scrap paper. Whitmore stood at the front, sleeves rolled up, exuding the kind of authority that didn't need to be spoken aloud. His voice carried easily, as he introduced the session. "We'll work through select problems together. Volunteers are welcome to approach the board." Most students avoided eye contact, burying themselves in their notes. Few dared to step into Whitmore's spotlight. Elijah sat near the front, his notebook heavy in his bag. His heart pounded with every word. Whitmore spoke, every stroke of chalk on the board. Then Whitmore posed a problem, an integral that sprawled across the width of the chalkboard, its steps messy and time-consuming. "Who would like to attempt this?" Whitmore asked, scanning the room. Silence filled the air, thick and suffocating. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elijah's hand rose before he could second-guess himself. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the room. Whitmore's eyes landed on him, cold and assessing. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, as though tasting the name. "Very well. Show us." Elijah walked to the board, each step echoing in his ears. He felt dozens of eyes on his back, a mix of curiosity and doubt. His hands trembled slightly as he took the marker, but when he touched it to the board, the fear receded. The numbers took over. He began with his method, not the long traditional approach Whitmore demanded, but the streamlined logic he had built piece by piece in sleepless nights. His writing was quick yet deliberate, each step flowing cleanly into the next. What normally took 10 or 12 lines collapsed neatly into 5. The room fell silent, students leaning forward as the solution unfolded. Some exchanged surprised looks, others nodded slowly as they followed his reasoning. When Elijah wrote the final answer at the bottom, the clarity of it seemed undeniable. A soft gasp broke the silence. Then a voice whispered, "That's actually faster." Another student, Bolder, added. And it makes more sense. Even Ryan, sitting near the back, leaned forward and muttered, "Damn." Elijah stepped back from the board, marker still in hand, his chest heaving. For a brief shining second, he felt the power of vindication. The class had seen it, they understood. But the moment shattered with a single sound, the slam of chalk against the tray. Whitmore strode forward, snatching the marker from Elijah's hand. His face was taut, his voice sharp. "This," he said, pointing at the board, "is not mathematics. This is showboating. Tricks. Parlor games." The room tensed, students exchanging uneasy glances. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "With respect, sir, the answer is correct. The steps are valid. It's just unconventional." Whitmore cut in, his tone laced with disdain. He turned to the class. "Mathematics is built on rigor, not shortcuts. Anyone can scribble half-baked ideas on a board. But mastery requires discipline, structure, precision." A few students looked down, cowed. But others couldn't hide their unease. They had seen the solution. They knew it worked. Elijah's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to shout that this wasn't a shortcut, that it was innovation. But he remembered Patel's warning. Whitmore had power. Too much of it. Whitmore leaned close, his voice low enough that only Elijah could hear. "Do not ever use these theatrics in my class again. If you wish to pass, you will follow the prescribed method. Do you understand?" Elijah met his gaze, fury burning in his chest. He didn't answer. Whitmore straightened, addressing the class again. "Let this be a lesson. There are no easy roads in mathematics. Those who chase them will fail." The session ended in uneasy silence. Students filed out quietly, some stealing glances at Elijah, but saying nothing. The energy that had flickered for a moment, admiration, recognition, faded under the weight of Whitmore's authority. Marcus caught up with Elijah outside. "Man, that was brutal. But you killed it, and they know it." Elijah's throat felt tight. "Doesn't matter. He'll never let me win. Not in his class." Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "So maybe it's time you stop thinking about winning in his class. Maybe you need to start thinking bigger." Elijah nodded faintly, though inside, a storm raged. The following day, he returned to his dorm to find an envelope slipped under his door. For a moment, his blood ran cold. Another threat. But when he tore it open, his stomach dropped for a different reason. It was a notice from the Academic Integrity Office. Elijah read the words twice, his vision blurring with disbelief. "A complaint has been filed against you regarding potential academic dishonesty. You are required to appear before the Academic Integrity Committee next week to address these allegations." The letter slipped from his hands, fluttering to the floor. His chest constricted, his mind spinning. Academic dishonesty. It wasn't just a grade anymore. Whitmore had escalated the fight. And now Elijah wasn't just at risk of failing a class. He was at risk of losing everything. Elijah stared at the letter in his trembling hands, realizing with sickening clarity that Whitmore hadn't just drawn a line in the sand. He had declared war. The letter from the Academic Integrity Office weighed heavier than any textbook Elijah had ever carried. He had read it a dozen times, but the words didn't dull. "You are required to appear before the Academic Integrity Committee to address allegations of dishonesty." Dishonesty. The accusation cut deeper than Whitmore's failing grades. To be branded a cheater was not only a blow to his academic record, it was an assault on his very identity. Elijah prided himself on working harder than anyone, on carving his place through persistence. To suggest he had stolen or fabricated his work was to erase every late night, every scribbled calculation, every ounce of sacrifice. News traveled fast, but the next morning, whispers followed him across campus. "Did you hear about Carter? They say he cheated on the exam." "How?" "The guy barely talks to anyone. Whitmore caught him. Must have been serious." Elijah kept his head down, but the shame clung to him like a shadow. Each look, each murmur, carried the sting of suspicion. He was no longer just the student struggling in Whitmore's class. He was now the accused. Marcus tried to shield him, deflecting rumors whenever they reached their dorm. But even his voice carried strain. "Don't listen to them, Eli. They don't know the truth. You've got proof. You've got Patel." But at night, when Elijah lay awake staring at the ceiling, doubt gnawed at him. Proof wasn't always enough. Truth didn't always win. The day of the hearing arrived too quickly. Elijah, dressed in his best shirt, wrinkled despite his attempts to iron it, his notebook clutched like armor. Marcus walked with him to the administration building, their footsteps echoing across the marble floor. "Keep your head," Marcus whispered. "Don't let him bait you." Elijah nodded, though his stomach churned. The hearing room was sterile, a long wooden table surrounded by professors and administrators. At the head sat the committee chair, Dr. Alvarez, a stern woman with sharp features and an unreadable expression. To her left sat two other faculty members. To her right, a student representative scribbled notes. And at the far end of the table sat Dr. Charles Whitmore. His posture was perfect, his expression calm as though he were here to teach a lesson rather than defend an accusation. Elijah sat opposite him, his pulse thundering in his ears. Dr. Alvarez cleared her throat. "We are here to review allegations of academic dishonesty filed against Mr. Elijah Carter. Dr. Whitmore, you may present your concerns." Whitmore adjusted his glasses, his voice steady, almost sympathetic. "Thank you. The matter is simple. On our recent exam, Mr. Carter presented solutions so unconventional that no undergraduate could reasonably have produced them. His methods deviate entirely from the rigor taught in this course. Such shortcuts suggest outside assistance, either plagiarism or unauthorized materials." Elijah's jaw clenched. "That's not true." Alvarez raised a hand. "You'll have your chance, Mr. Carter." Whitmore continued, his tone calm but poisoned. "Furthermore, Mr. Carter has displayed a pattern of inconsistency. His homework demonstrates frequent misunderstandings, yet on the exam he produced solutions of startling efficiency. This inconsistency strongly suggests academic dishonesty." The words rippled through the room like a verdict already passed. Elijah felt his chest tighten. When Alvarez finally nodded to him, Elijah opened his notebook with trembling hands. "With respect, I didn't cheat. The method I used? I created it. I've been working on it for weeks." He flipped through pages, showing line after line of notes. Each problem worked in his new style. "This is my work. Every page is dated. You can see the progression, the trial and error. I didn't steal it. I built it." One committee member leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Show us." Elijah's throat went dry, but he pushed through. He stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, and walked them through a sample problem. His steps flowed cleanly, the solution unfolding with clarity. He spoke with a mix of nerves and conviction, his voice catching at times but never breaking. When he finished, silence hung in the air. For a moment, he thought they understood. Then Whitmore's voice cut through, cold and surgical. "You see, this performance is precisely the issue. He has memorized tricks, rehearsed them like an act. It is not mathematics, it is deception dressed as insight." Elijah spun toward him, anger flashing. "No, it's understanding. It's innovation. You're punishing me not because it's wrong, but because it didn't come from you." Whitmore's eyes glinted, but his expression remained calm. "Students do not innovate. They learn. To suggest otherwise is arrogance, or dishonesty." The words landed like a gavel. Elijah felt his knees weaken. Around the table, faces hardened, skeptical. The whispers from the hallways echoed in his mind. "Cheater, cheater, cheater." For a moment, he feared it was over. But then, a voice broke the silence. "May I speak?" Heads turned. Dr. Anika Patel had entered quietly, her presence calm yet commanding. She held a slim folder in her hands. Alvarez nodded for her to continue. Patel stepped forward, laying the folder on the table. "I have reviewed Mr. Carter's work independently. His method is not only valid, it is innovative. I tested it against multiple problem sets, and it holds. These are my notes." She opened the folder, revealing annotated pages where she had worked through Elijah's steps herself. "This is not memorization. This is not theft. This is originality." Murmurs spread around the table. Alvarez raised her brows, scanning the documents. The faculty member who had shown curiosity earlier now leaned forward with genuine interest. Whitmore's calm cracked for the first time. His jaw tightened. "With respect, Dr. Patel, your opinion does not override the standards of my course. I alone determine what constitutes valid work in my classroom." Patel's gaze was steady, unflinching. Standards should never be a weapon, and students should not be punished for thinking differently, especially when their work is correct. The room shifted. For the first time, the balance seemed to tilt. Elijah's heart pounded as hope flickered in his chest. Patel's words had pierced the silence, the wall Whitmore had built around him. But Whitmore's eyes burned into him, cold and calculating. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a fight that could cost them both dearly. The committee chair tapped her pen against the folder, her expression unreadable. We've heard enough. We'll deliberate. Elijah's breath caught as he realized the decision would come down to one thing. Whose voice carried more weight? Whitmore's authority, or Patel's truth? The room felt as if it had shrunk around Elijah. The polished wood of the committee table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, every detail sharp and unforgiving. His palms were damp against the surface, his notebook lying closed before him like a locked door. At the far end, Dr. Alvarez studied Patel's notes, her pen tapping rhythmically against the table. The other faculty members leaned in, murmuring quietly, eyes darting between the documents, and Elijah himself. Whitmore sat rigid, his jaw tight, though his expression remained carefully composed. Patel broke the silence. "If you'll permit me," she said, sliding Elijah's notebook onto the table. "This is the student's original work. Not a polished performance, not a rehearsed trick, just weeks of raw thought, experimentation and revision. Look for yourselves." Alvarez nodded, motioning for the committee to examine it. One by one, the professors leaned over the open pages. Elijah watched their eyes move across his handwriting, scribbled attempts, half-erased lines, arrows crisscrossing the margins. Whole problems scratched out and redone, mistakes corrected with furious strokes. Every page told the story of a struggle, not a shortcut. One committee member, Dr. Lee, flipped further. His brows rose as he traced the evolution of the steps. "This isn't plagiarism," he said finally. "This is developmental. Look here, he starts with traditional methods, then gradually adapts them. By the later pages, his system emerges naturally." Luck. Another faculty member leaned closer, murmuring, "You can see the trial and error. No one fabricates mistakes like this to prove authenticity. This is lived work." Elijah's chest tightened, his breath shallow. For weeks he had been drowning under Whitmore's red marks, his voice dismissed as arrogance, his innovations erased. And now, for the first time, his notebook was speaking louder than Whitmore's accusations. But Whitmore wasn't finished. He adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but edged. A clever forgery, perhaps. A student determined enough could fabricate drafts to cover his tracks. Patel's eyes flashed. "That's absurd. Why would a student invent weeks of false work, with consistent handwriting, mistakes and corrections, only to present it here? And why, if he truly plagiarized, would he perform so convincingly at the board yesterday?" Whitmore didn't flinch. Performance can be memorized. Integrity cannot. Elijah's fists tightened under the table. He wanted to shout, to demand Whitmore admit the truth, that his grading wasn't about mathematics but about power, control, and prejudice. But Patel gave him a subtle look, steady, grounding, reminding him that anger was the weapon Whitmore wanted him to wield. So Elijah stayed quiet, letting the pages speak. Dr. Lee flipped again, his voice firmer now. "This is not the work of a cheater. This is the work of a thinker." The words sent a shiver through Elijah. For the first time, someone in authority wasn't questioning whether he belonged. They were acknowledging his mind. The room shifted. Alvarez leaned back, her expression unreadable, but her pen stopped tapping. The balance was tilting. Whitmore's mask cracked just slightly, his lips thinning, his hand tightening around his pen until his knuckles whitened. Patel pressed the moment. "This isn't about shortcuts. It's about innovation. Mr. Carter is thinking beyond the prescribed path, and that should be encouraged, not punished. Isn't that what academia is supposed to be?" The student representative, quiet until now, spoke hesitantly. "Honestly, when I saw him solve at the review session, I thought it made sense. Faster, clearer. I wish I'd learned it that way." The words were small, but their impact was seismic. A murmur of agreement rippled between the faculty members. For the first time, Whitmore looked cornered. Elijah's heart pounded. The tide was turning. He felt it in the air, the shift from suspicion to possibility, from isolation to recognition. Maybe, just maybe, he could walk out of this room, not branded a cheater, but seen as what he truly was, a student fighting for his rightful place. But then Alvarez's voice cut through the murmurs, calm, measured, unyielding. "We've heard compelling points from both sides," she said. "And while the notebook provides valuable context, this matter cannot be resolved today. The committee will review the evidence further before reaching a final decision." Elijah's stomach dropped. Further review. More waiting, more whispers in the hallways, more stares branding him a fraud before the verdict even came. Whitmore's face smoothed back into composure, the faintest shadow of a smirk tugging at his lips. He had survived this round. He wasn't beaten yet. Patel exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across her features. With respect, Chair, this student's future hangs in the balance. Every day of delay harms him further. Alvarez's gaze was firm, and every rushed decision risks injustice. We will reconvene when our review is complete. The gavel's light tap ended the session. Elijah sat frozen for a moment, his body numb. He had come so close to vindication, tasted it on the edge of Patel's words, felt it in the nods of professors who saw his truth. And yet he was still in limbo, not cleared, not condemned, just suspended in uncertainty. As the committee filed out, Whitmore walked past without a glance, his cologne sharp in the air. Elijah felt the chill of his presence like a shadow passing over him. Patel placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. You did well, she said softly. You showed them who you are. Don't let the waiting break you. Elijah nodded faintly, though the words barely reached him. His notebook was back in his bag, heavier than ever, proof of his brilliance and yet not enough to free him. Outside, the campus bustled as if nothing had changed. Students laughed on the quad, the autumn wind scattering leaves across the grass. Life moved forward, indifferent to the storm raging inside him. Marcus found him on the steps of the administration building, his expression tense. Well, Elijah's voice cracked. They're reviewing. No decision, Marcus cursed under his breath. That's their way of stalling, hoping you'll crack before they have to admit the truth. Elijah looked down at the notebook in his lap, his reflection faint in the glossy cover. He thought of Jasmine, erased, of Sophia, silenced, of every whisper that said he didn't belong. He would not disappear quietly. But as he sat there, the sun dipping lower, a darker thought pressed in. Whitmore had escalated from red marks to formal accusations. What would he try next, now that the committee had not given him the victory he wanted? Elijah clenched his notebook, the weight of uncertainty pressing down, when Marcus's phone buzzed with a campus alert. His eyes widened as he read aloud. Anonymous reports of widespread cheating ring under investigation in the mathematics department. Suspects unnamed. Elijah's blood ran cold. Whitmore wasn't done. He was widening the battlefield. The campus alert spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed in lecture halls. Whispers traveled across dining tables, and social media lit up with speculation. Cheating ring in the mathematics department. No names were given, but Elijah didn't need to read between the lines. He felt the target painted on his back as clearly as the red F's Whitmore had scrawled across his papers. By the next morning, the rumors had crystallized into certainty in the minds of his peers. I heard Carter's the ringleader. Yeah. Explains those weird methods. Nobody comes up with that on their own. Bet he had someone feeding him answers. Each word sliced at him as he walked across the quad, their eyes following him like shadows. Students he had once studied alongside now avoided his gaze. A girl he had helped tutor last semester crossed the sidewalk to avoid passing him. Even Ryan, usually easygoing, had grown quiet, his greetings clipped and cautious. It wasn't just grades anymore. It was exile. Elijah retreated to the library, burying himself in the farthest corner. But even there, whispers followed. The isolation pressed on him like a weight he couldn't shake. His chest felt heavy, his nights restless. When he did sleep, he dreamed of red ink bleeding across endless pages, the word cheater echoing louder each time. Marcus remained his anchor, though even his presence couldn't dissolve the pressure. One evening, as Elijah sat hunched over his notebook with trembling hands, Marcus placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You're breaking yourself, Marcus said softly. I can't stop, Elijah muttered, his voice hoarse. If I stop, he wins. He erases me like he erased Jasmine, like he erased everyone before me. Marcus crouched beside him, forcing Elijah to meet his eyes. Listen to me. Every great mind went through this. Rejection, ridicule, isolation. It's the price of breaking new ground. You think Galileo didn't get laughed at? You think Du Bois didn't get shut out of rooms he deserved to be in? You're in their company now. Don't forget that. Elijah blinked hard, his throat tight. Marcus's words lit something faint inside him. A reminder that the struggle wasn't just about him. It was about every door that had been slammed shut on people who dared to think differently, especially people who looked like him. Still, the pressure mounted. Classes became unbearable. In lectures, students glanced at him with suspicion, their eyes darting between him and Whitmore. Every time Whitmore posed a question, Elijah kept his hand down, knowing that any word from him would only fuel the narrative. His silence burned, but so did the stares. Even the committee's further review felt like another nail in his coffin. Days passed with no decision. Each email notification sent his heart racing, only to find nothing but silence. One afternoon, exhausted and hollow, Elijah left the library and found himself wandering aimlessly across campus. The autumn wind tugged at his jacket, the trees shedding leaves in spirals. He paused near the engineering building, watching students laugh as they streamed out of class. Their lives seemed so light, untouched by the kind of weight crushing him. He thought of his mother, working back-to-back shifts at the hospital, sending him messages late at night. "Proud of you, baby. Keep pushing." He hadn't told her about the accusations. How could he? To admit the truth would be to admit he was losing. His phone buzzed. A message from Jasmine. "Stay strong. I know how heavy it gets, but don't let him silence you. He feeds on silence." Her words struck deep. If he gave up now, he wouldn't just fail himself. He'd be confirming Whitmore's pattern. He'd be another name whispered in the halls. Another casualty erased. So Elijah kept pushing. He filled his notebook with more proofs, refining his method until the pages blurred. He copied assignments before submitting them, recorded the dates, circled every unjust comment. Whitmore left. His binder was no longer just evidence. It was a lifeline. But the stress was visible. His hands shook during lectures. Dark circles framed his eyes. One night, Marcus found him staring blankly at the wall, his notebook unopened on the desk. "Elijah," Marcus said quietly, "you're at the edge. If you break, he wins. Don't let him push you there." Elijah finally spoke, his voice low and raw. "What if I already am?" Marcus sat beside him, silent. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. The breaking point came days later, not with a whisper in the hall or a rumor online, but with an email notification that appeared as Elijah sat hunched in the library. His heart leapt as he opened it, hoping it was the committee's decision at last. Instead, the subject line read, "Midterm correction request denied." His eyes scanned the message, disbelief hardening into fury. "Due to concerns regarding the integrity of your submitted work, your request to resubmit corrections for partial credit has been denied. As stated in course policy, failure to submit corrections results in a forfeiture of up to 30% of your grade." Elijah's vision blurred. 30% gone, not because of mistakes, but because Whitmore had decided his voice didn't deserve to be heard. Marcus, sitting across the table, watched Elijah's face pale. "What is it?" Elijah turned the screen toward him, his voice hollow. "He just cut 30% of my grade. Just like that." Marcus's jaw tightened. "He's trying to bury you." Elijah's fists clenched until his knuckles ached. He had endured the whispers, the isolation, the sleepless nights. But this was different. This wasn't just bias. This was sabotage, deliberate, calculated. Fine. The breaking point had come. And Elijah knew, with a clarity sharper than rage, that he had to act. Elijah stared at the glowing email on his laptop, his chest heaving. If Whitmore could erase 30% of his grade with a keystroke, what else could he erase? His GPA? His future? His very name? Elijah sat in his dorm room, the glow of his laptop painting shadows across the walls. The rejected midterm correction email was still open on the screen, the words 30% forfeiture circling his mind like a verdict. He had taken every blow silently, until now. Red marks, whispers, accusation. But this was different. This was suffocation. For the first time, he wondered if Whitmore had already won. The thought of quitting pressed in on him like a heavy blanket. Dropping the class, switching majors, starting fresh somewhere Whitmore's shadow couldn't reach. Maybe that was the smarter choice. Maybe Jasmine had been right. Sometimes the system was too heavy to fight. He closed his laptop and pressed his palms against his eyes. Exhaustion pulsed through him, more bone-deep than any late-night study session. If he quit, the rumors would linger, but eventually fade. People would move on, but his mother's voice echoed in his head. "I'm proud of you, baby. Keep pushing." And then Patel's warning. Silence is his weapon. Elijah sat frozen, his hands trembling. Then slowly, he reopened his laptop. He created a blank document, his heart racing with each keystroke. This time, he wouldn't write for Whitmore, or the committee, or the university. He would write for himself, for Jasmine, for Sophia, for every name erased before him. The words poured out raw, unpolished, but honest. He described the red Fs that marked correct work. He recounted overhearing Whitmore's chilling words. "He'll never pass under me." He explained how assignments were graded with bias, how classmates with errors received higher marks while students of color were quietly pushed out. And then he opened his notebook and began scanning in pages, his method laid bare. He explained step by step how he had built it, through trial and error, through sleepless nights in the library, through stubborn persistence. He ended the letter with a single line that burned in his chest as he typed it. "I refuse to disappear quietly." Elijah stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the publish button. Doubt screamed at him. What if they laughed? What if they ignored him? What if this destroyed him completely? But silence was already destroying him. He pressed the button. The post went live at 3:17. By the time Elijah woke the next morning, his phone was buzzing non-stop. Marcus burst into the room holding his own phone, his face lit with disbelief. "Eli, you're everywhere." Elijah rubbed his eyes, sitting up. "What do you mean?"
Your post.
"It's been shared like 100 times already." "No, look." Marcus shoved the phone in front of him. The numbers were climbing by the second: shares, comments, reposts. Elijah's stomach dropped. He scrolled through the comments. Finally, someone said it. "This happened to me in my freshman year. I dropped out because of him. They've been letting this slide for years. Enough is enough." By noon, the campus was buzzing. In dining halls, students debated fiercely. Some dismissed him. "He's just mad he failed." But others rallied. "He's right. You know how many of us have been pushed out." A group of black and brown students organized a meeting that evening. They gathered in the student center, nearly 50 strong. Some Elijah recognized, many he didn't. They shared stories, grades that didn't make sense, opportunities denied, voices ignored. "We've been carrying this for too long," one student said, her voice shaking. "He thinks he can silence us because we never speak together. Not anymore." For the first time, Elijah realized his letter wasn't just his fight. It was a spark. By the next day, flyers appeared on bulletin boards. "Accountability now. Hold Professor Whitmore responsible." Students marched across campus with signs, chanting outside Hamilton Hall. Reporters from the student newspaper covered the story, snapping photos of Elijah as he walked to class. He wanted to shrink into the crowd, but whispers followed him everywhere. "That's him. The one who wrote the letter. Think he's telling the truth? He looks tired." The administration scrambled. Emails circulated about ongoing investigations and commitment to fairness, but the protests grew louder. Then came the moment Elijah hadn't expected. He was in the library when his phone buzzed with a notification. A message from an education forum moderator. "Your story has been posted on our front page." Confused, Elijah clicked the link. His letter, reshared by someone he didn't know, had reached one of the largest online education communities in the country. The comments section exploded with debate. Teachers, students, even professionals weighing in. Some dissected his method, praising its elegance. Others focused on the racial dynamics, connecting his experience to broader systemic issues in academia. And then the journalists came. The first email arrived from a local news outlet. "We'd like to interview you about your letter and your experiences." By evening, there were 3 more. National outlets, education magazines, even a podcast host. Elijah stared at the screen, his pulse racing. His private battle had burst into the open. Whitmore's office hours, the red ink, the whispers, all of it was now a public story. Marcus leaned over his shoulder, his voice low. "You wanted your voice heard. Well, now the whole country's listening." Elijah exhaled shakily, staring at the flood of messages. Fear churned in his gut, but so did something stronger. For the first time, Whitmore wouldn't be the only one controlling the narrative. Elijah's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a student or an ally. It was a journalist from a major national outlet. The subject line read, "Interview request. Elijah Carter, cheater or trailblazer?" Elijah's chest tightened. The world was watching, and the answer depended on how he chose to speak. The ripple began with a single post. Elijah's open letter typed at 3 a.m., after staring too long at the email that stripped away 30% of his grade, was raw, unpolished, but honest. He hadn't expected much when he pressed publish. Maybe a handful of classmates would read it. Maybe Patel would see it. Maybe it would just sit there, drowned out by louder voices. But by morning, the ripple had become a wave. Dozens of students shared the letter across campus. By noon, local blogs picked it up. Hawthorne University student claims racial bias in math department. By evening, national outlets had seized on it. Black students' new method of solving calculus sparks controversy. Elijah Carter was no longer just a name whispered in classrooms. He was a headline. At first, the attention terrified him. He saw his own face on news sites, his words quoted in bold, strangers debating his worth in comment sections. Some accused him of playing the race card. Others dismissed him as an attention seeker. But many, far more than he expected, rallied to his side. Students of color across the country shared stories of professors who had underestimated them, erased their work, questioned their intelligence. His inbox filled with messages. "I know exactly what you're going through. Don't give up." The tide turned further when Patel reached out to her network. Within days, respected mathematicians across the nation weighed in, examining Elijah's method themselves. Some praised its elegance, others marveled at its clarity. A few skeptics remained. But the narrative was shifting. Elijah wasn't a cheater. He was a trailblazer. And then the twist Elijah hadn't expected. Past students of Whitmore began to come forward. It started with Jasmine, who bravely shared her story publicly after reading Elijah's post. "He ruined my GPA," she said in a video that spread across social media. "I thought it was just me, but seeing Elijah fight back made me realize it was never just me." One by one, others added their voices. A graduate who had switched majors because Whitmore made it impossible to succeed. A student who had dropped out entirely, convinced he wasn't cut out for higher education. Their accounts painted a damning pattern. Different years, different students, same story. For the first time, the spotlight shifted off Elijah alone and onto Whitmore himself. The pressure mounted quickly. Reporters gathered outside Hawthorne's campus, shoving microphones toward anyone who might offer a quote. Students debated in dining halls, some defending Whitmore, others demanding accountability. A petition circulated calling for an investigation into Whitmore's grading practices, gathering thousands of signatures within days. Whitmore, once untouchable, now stood in the center of a storm. Elijah, meanwhile, found himself thrust into interviews he never imagined giving. At first, his voice trembled under the studio lights. Cameras felt invasive, microphones too close, questions too sharp. But each time he explained his method, confidence grew. "It's not about shortcuts," he told one interviewer. "It's about clarity. I wanted to find a way to make calculus less intimidating, especially for students who feel shut out. That's all I ever wanted, to make math feel possible." He never spoke with arrogance, only humility. He credited his grandmother's encouragement, his mother's sacrifices, Patel's support. His words carried a quiet power that resonated beyond equations. Soon his story wasn't just about math. It was about justice. One evening, Marcus shoved his phone in front of Elijah, his grin wide. "Dude, you're trending. Look." Elijah scrolled through Twitter, stunned. Hashtags filled his screen. "Let Elijah speak. Math without bias. Whitmore exposed." Students across the country were posting videos of themselves trying Elijah's method, tagging him with messages of thanks. Elijah sat back, overwhelmed. This is bigger than me." Marcus clapped his shoulder. "It always was. You just lit the match." But with the spotlight came danger. Elijah's inbox filled not just with support, but with hate. Anonymous messages spat venom. "Fraud. Liar. You'll never make it." Some carried darker undertones, threats that twisted his stomach. Patel urged him to stay cautious. "Visibility is power, Elijah, but it also makes you a target. Stay close to those you trust." Through it all, Elijah clung to his notebook. It grounded him. The messy pages, the scratched-out attempts, the diagrams drawn at 4 a.m. Those pages reminded him that this wasn't about fame or even justice alone. It was about the work, about proving that brilliance could come from anywhere, even from a kid Whitmore had written off. Then came the email that changed everything. From the office of the provost, in response to recent allegations and public concern, the university will be holding a public hearing. Both Professor Charles Whitmore and student Elijah Carter will be present to address the matter before the academic board. Elijah read the words 3 times, his chest tightening. A public hearing, not another closed-door session, not whispers in hallways. This would be on record, in front of the campus, the media, the world. Marcus looked over his shoulder, his jaw dropping. "Man, this is it. This is the showdown." Elijah's hands trembled as he closed his laptop. He thought of Whitmore's cold promise. "He'll never pass under me." He thought of Jasmine's broken voice, Sophia's silence, the countless names erased before him. And he thought of the chance, at last, to speak where Whitmore could not erase him. The news spread across campus within hours. Elijah and Whitmore, face to face, and a hearing open to students, faculty, and reporters. For the first time, Whitmore wouldn't control the room. But as Elijah lay awake that night, one question burned in his chest. Would the truth be enough, or would the system protect its own once again? The auditorium buzzed with restless anticipation. For days, the campus had been simmering, whispers of Elijah Carter's battle with Dr. Charles Whitmore spreading from lecture halls to dining halls, from dorm rooms to social media feeds. Now the tension had condensed into this single moment, the public hearing. Elijah stood in the wings, his palms clammy against the folder clutched in his hands. His notebook, his lifeline, was tucked safely inside, pages worn from weeks of relentless use. Beyond the curtain, he could hear the crowd settling, the scrape of chairs, the low hum of cameras as reporters adjusted their equipment. Marcus stood beside him, his voice low but steady. Whatever happens in there, you've already won. People are listening now. They can't erase that. Elijah nodded. Though his chest tightened, he didn't feel like a winner. Not yet. Not until the truth was undeniable. A voice announced from the stage. This hearing will address allegations of academic misconduct brought forth by Professor Charles Whitmore against student Elijah Carter. Both parties will be given equal opportunity to present their cases before the board. Elijah drew a sharp breath as the curtain parted. The sight struck him like a wave. The auditorium was packed. Students crammed shoulder to shoulder, professors scattered throughout, administrators seated stiffly in the front rows. Cameras dotted the aisles, their red lights glowing like watchful eyes. On stage, a long table stretched across the platform. At its center sat the academic board, led by Dr. Alvarez. To the left, Whitmore already sat, his posture perfect, his expression calm but sharp. His suit was immaculate, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He looked less like a professor facing scrutiny, and more like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. Elijah walked to the opposite chair, the weight of every eye pressing down on him. The whispers grew louder. That's him. Looks nervous. Think he really cheated? He sat, forcing his back straight. His pulse hammered, but his face remained still. Dr. Alvarez opened the proceedings. Professor Whitmore, you may present your case. Whitmore rose smoothly, his voice carrying across the hall. This is not a matter of race, nor of innovation, as some would claim. This is a matter of integrity. Mr. Carter has repeatedly submitted work that defies the rigor required of this institution. His so-called method is not mathematics. It is a fabrication, a performance. His record shows inconsistency, his attitude a lack of discipline, and now he cloaks his shortcomings in accusations against me. This is not courage. It is excuse-making. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some nodded in agreement. Others bristled. Whitmore's words were precise, polished, designed to cut. He sat, folding his hands calmly. All eyes turned to Elijah. He rose slowly, clutching his folder. His voice wavered at first, but grew steadier with each word. I didn't cheat. I didn't fabricate. What I did was think differently. My method wasn't about shortcuts. It was about clarity, and I can prove it. He opened his notebook and approached the board set up on stage. His hands trembled as he uncapped the marker. But once the numbers appeared, his fear melted into focus. He worked through a problem, clean, precise, each step unfolding in a way that felt both natural and elegant. The solution appeared faster than the traditional method, but with complete accuracy. He turned to the audience. This is what I built. Not copied, not memorized. Built. The auditorium was silent for a beat. Then murmurs began to swell. Students leaned forward, whispering to each other. A professor in the front row adjusted his glasses, nodding slightly. Whitmore stood abruptly, his voice sharp. Sleight of hand. Anyone can rehearse a trick for the stage, but mathematics is not theater. Elijah met his gaze, his voice firm. Then why does it work? Why does every problem I've tested hold under this method? If it were a trick, it would break. But it doesn't. Not once. Another professor from the audience stood. Dr. Miller, known for being one of Whitmore's longtime allies. May I see the notebook? Elijah froze, then handed it over. Miller flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. He lingered on the early scribbles, the scratched-out attempts, the gradual evolution of logic. He closed the notebook slowly. This is authentic. No student fabricates months of drafts like this. His process is clear. The murmurs grew louder. A ripple of applause broke out from the back rows. Whitmore's composure cracked, his voice rising. You're letting sentiment cloud judgment. He's playing to your sympathies. This institution is not a place for half-baked ideas. But another professor spoke up, this time from the board itself. What he demonstrated was not half-baked. It was innovation. Whether or not you approve, the mathematics holds. Applause grew, hesitant at first, then louder. Students clapped, some standing. The noise filled the auditorium, drowning Whitmore's protests. Elijah stood at the center, his chest heaving. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. His voice wasn't erased. He was seen. Dr. Alvarez raised her hand, calling for order. The applause quieted, though the energy still pulsed through the room. She turned to the board members beside her, their faces serious, contemplative. The evidence has been presented, Alvarez said. We will now deliberate on the matter of Mr. Carter's academic standing. Elijah's stomach dropped. The moment stretched, every heartbeat louder than the last. Around him, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. But all he could hear was the silence of the board, as they leaned together, whispering. His entire future, his name, his work, his dignity, rested in their hands. Dr. Alvarez lifted her gavel. The board has reached its decision. The ruling on Elijah Carter's academic future will be delivered now. The auditorium held its breath. Dr. Alvarez lifted her gavel slowly, her gaze sweeping across the packed room before returning to Elijah. Her voice carried steady authority. The board has reached its decision. Elijah's chest tightened, his pulse roaring in his ears. He gripped the edge of the table to stop his hands from trembling. Every face in the room, students, professors, reporters, seemed to blur as he waited. After reviewing the evidence, the testimony, and the student's original work, Alvarez continued, this board finds no grounds for academic dishonesty. A murmur surged through the room. Elijah blinked, the words washing over him but not fully landing. No grounds for dishonesty. Alvarez raised her hand for silence, then added, furthermore, this board recognizes the originality and validity of Mr. Carter's mathematical method. What was dismissed as unorthodox is in fact innovation worthy of recognition. Mr. Carter's record will be cleared, and his contributions formally acknowledged. The auditorium erupted. Applause thundered, students cheering, professors nodding in agreement. Some stood, clapping hard, their voices carrying chants of his name. Elijah stood frozen, his throat tight, his eyes burning. He wanted to smile, to shout, to cry, but all he could do was breathe. Whitmore, meanwhile, sat rigid, his face drained of color. For the first time, the mask of superiority cracked. He shifted as Alvarez turned her gaze toward him. This board also concludes that Professor Whitmore's handling of student work has failed to meet the ethical standards of this institution, Alvarez said firmly. Effective immediately, Professor Whitmore is suspended from his teaching duties pending further review. The gasp that followed was sharper than applause. Students whispered fiercely, some in shock, others vindicated. Whitmore's lips parted, his jaw trembling as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Elijah caught his eye for a brief second. For weeks those eyes had looked at him with cold dismissal, as if he were invisible. Now for the first time, Whitmore looked away. Marcus gripped Elijah's shoulder from the audience, his grin wide, his eyes shining. Patel stood nearby, her expression calm but proud, her presence grounding him in the chaos. Elijah exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. For the first time since that first red F, he wasn't drowning. He was free. The days that followed moved quickly. The university released an official statement, framing the decision as a commitment to fairness and innovation. They praised Elijah's perseverance and acknowledged the harm done by biased evaluation. It was carefully worded, but the message was clear. Whitmore's era of unchecked authority was over. News outlets ran with the story. Black students' calculus method vindicated. From cheater to innovator. Interviews flooded Elijah's schedule, though he approached each with humility. I never set out to be a headline, he told one reporter. I just wanted fairness. I wanted to show that math doesn't care who you are. Numbers don't lie. People do. His method spread beyond campus. Professors at other universities requested copies of his notes. Online forums debated its implications, some suggesting it could reshape how calculus was taught to beginners. Elijah's inbox filled with messages from students thanking him for giving them hope. But for Elijah, the real victory wasn't in recognition. It was in rewriting the story he'd almost let Whitmore erase. Months later, the lecture hall looked different. The same oak doors, the same towering chalkboard. But this time, Elijah stood at the front. A group of younger students gathered for a tutoring session he had volunteered to lead. He paced slowly, chalk in hand, guiding them through problems with patience and clarity. His voice carried not authority but encouragement. When one student hesitated, he smiled gently. "Take your time, every mistake is just a step forward." Their eyes lit up as the solution unfolded using his method. The same approach Whitmore had once branded invalid now helped struggling students see math with fresh eyes. After class, one girl lingered. "I almost dropped math," she admitted softly. "But the way you explained it, it actually makes sense." Elijah's chest warmed. That's the point. Math should make sense. It should belong to everyone. She smiled shyly before leaving. Elijah turned back to the chalkboard. The last problem still glowed white against the black surface, solved with his method. Slowly, he lifted the eraser. For a moment, his mind flashed back to that first day in Whitmore's class. The cold stares, the dismissive words, the red F scrawled across flawless work. The wound that had nearly broken him. But now, as the chalk dust smudged away the equation, the memory felt different. That red F wasn't a symbol of failure anymore. It was proof of what he had endured and what he had overcome. He had taken the mark meant to erase him and rewritten it into something unerasable. As the last line vanished under the eraser, Elijah whispered under his breath, not for anyone else to hear, but for himself, "Never again." The board was clean now, but in his mind Elijah still saw that first red F, once a scar, now a reminder, not of what Whitmore tried to take from him, but of how he had rewritten the rules. Stories like Elijah's aren't just his. They belong to every student who was told they didn't belong. If you believe voices like his deserve to be heard, type yes in the comments. And if this story broke your heart, subscribe because silence only protects injustice.